give them a bigger picture, and they can relax more into it rather than be really anxious about what are you hiding from me, what do I not know, why is that happening? There's a lot more questions in there.
Prince William fiercely intervened inside Kensington Palace to reject a late-stage structural request from Queen Camilla regarding the redistribution of estate wealth. Defying the new palace layout, the Prince of Wales took Princess Charlotte by the hand to personally escort her into the royal trust ahead of schedule. This protective, defiant maneuver completely outpaced the Queen's legal team to secure his daughter's independent financial future. The shocking confrontation has exposed a raw, generational power struggle over who truly controls the long-term wealth of the royal house. The secret amendment at Kensington Palace. The light inside the private reception room at apartment 1A was unusually bright for a Tuesday morning. A long, polished oak table had been moved into the center of the space, completely clearing away the comfortable family furniture that usually filled the room. 6 heavy leather chairs sat around the wood, occupied by senior estate trustees, corporate attorneys, and the personal private secretaries of the principal members of the royal family. The atmosphere was cold, clinical, and thick with administrative tension. The date was May 12th, 2026. It was a day that had been marked on the internal palace calendar for over 6 months as a routine compliance review for the Sovereign Estate Trust. This trust was a highly complex historical financial vehicle established in the late Victorian era to manage the private, non-state investments of the direct line of succession. It existed entirely outside the jurisdiction of Parliament and the standard oversight of the Treasury. It was the ultimate financial shield of the family, designed to provide independent income for the younger generation of royals. At the head of the table sat Prince William, his expression unreadable as he watched his personal legal team sort through a stack of thick, watermarked documents. To his left sat a seat that had been intentionally left vacant, reserved for the representatives of the king's household. The meeting was supposed to be a straightforward technical signing ceremony to adjust the inflation index payouts for the upcoming fiscal year. It was a process that usually took less than 20 minutes and required no high-level debate. The routine nature of the meeting collapsed completely at 10:15. A senior corporate attorney representing Queen Camilla's private office walked into the room without an appointment. He did not apologize for the interruption. He carried a single dark red leather folder containing a late-stage amendment to the trust's structural distribution rules. He walked directly to the center of the table and placed the document flat on the oak surface, requesting that the trustees immediately integrate the text into the master deed before William affixed his signature. The sudden appearance of the red folder was a direct legal ambush. William's chief of staff, who had been sitting at the far end of the table, immediately reached out and pulled the document toward his side of the room. As he scanned the dense legal text, his face became noticeably rigid. He leaned over and whispered a brief, urgent summary into the Prince of Wales's ear. William did not say a word, but his fingers tightened instantly around his silver fountain pen, his posture becoming completely motionless. The amendment proposed an unprecedented structural change to the liquidity rules of the trust. Under the existing framework, the children of the direct heir were entitled to receive independent, unrestricted financial payouts from the estate the moment they reached their 11th birthdays. This rule had been designed by Queen Elizabeth II to ensure that younger royals could establish their own charitable foundations and private security structures without having to beg for funding from the reigning monarch's centralized household. Camilla's proposed amendment sought to completely dismantle this independent timeline. The text argued that in the interest of modernizing the family's public image during a period of national economic hardship, all major liquid payouts to minor royals should be deferred. Specifically, the amendment stated that the funds intended for Princess Charlotte should be placed into a centralized holding account managed directly by the keeper of the privy purse at Buckingham Palace. Under this new layout, Charlotte would not gain independent autonomy over her inheritance until either her 25th birthday or her marriage, whichever came first. Furthermore, any interim spending for her education, security, or public deployments would require a co-signature from the Queen's principal private secretary. The strategy behind the amendment was clear to everyone in the room. By centralizing the financial distribution of the trust, Camilla's office was attempting to secure long-term structural leverage over the next generation of working royals. It was a calculated move to ensure that the younger line of the House of Wales remained entirely dependent on the centralized authority of the current sovereign's household. It would effectively strip William of his ability to independently manage his daughter's future public profile, forcing him to clear every single charitable initiative through a committee controlled by his stepmother's staff. William looked down at the paper. He realized that this ambush had been planned weeks in advance, timed to coincide with a period when his father, King Charles, was away from London conducting state duties in Scotland. The palace machinery had assumed that William would simply sign the document to avoid a dramatic public confrontation with his father's household. They had severely underestimated his determination to protect his children from the exact same institutional vulnerabilities that had compromised previous generations of royal women. The Prince of Wales pushed the red folder back across the polished table toward the Queen's attorney. His voice was remarkably quiet, but it carried an absolute freezing authority that caused the entire room to fall into a dead silence. He told the attorney that the amendment was completely rejected. He stated that he would not permit external administrative committees to dictate the financial autonomy of his daughter. He looked directly at the senior estate trustees and informed them that if they attempted to integrate the red folder into the master deed, he would refuse to sign the standard compliance paperwork, effectively freezing the entire trust's operations for the rest of the calendar year. The threat of a total operational freeze threw the legal teams into an immediate state of panic. A freeze would halt the inflation payouts for multiple branches of the extended family, triggering an internal administrative crisis that the palace could not possibly hide from the financial sector. The Queen's attorney attempted to argue that the amendment was designed strictly to protect the family from negative tabloid headlines regarding royal wealth, but William cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. He stood up from his chair and turned to his private secretary, issuing a direct, unscripted command that completely bypassed the standard morning protocol. He told her to exit the apartment immediately, walk down the corridor to the private schoolroom, and bring Princess Charlotte directly into the reception room. He wanted his daughter present in the room, not as a passive subject of a legal dispute, but as an active participant in her own institutional destiny. The legal battle over the royal inheritance was no longer a hidden game of memos and spreadsheets. William was about to turn it into a direct, historical confrontation that would permanently redefine the balance of power inside the palace walls. The battle over Charlotte's royal inheritance. The double doors of the private reception room at apartment 1. It remained unlatched while the private secretary hurried down the carpeted gallery. Inside the room, the silence was absolute. None of the corporate attorneys or senior estate trustees attempted to speak. The silver fountain pen Prince William had cast aside lay exactly where it landed, its polished barrel catching the stark morning light. The Queen's legal representative stood by the window, nervously shifting his weight, his fingers adjusting the knot of his silk tie. To fully understand why William was willing to risk an open, permanent rift with Queen Camilla's office over a single late-stage amendment, one must look directly at the hidden financial history of the British royal family. For centuries, the institution had operated under a highly traditional, deeply biased framework regarding how male and female heirs were provided for. While the eldest son automatically inherited the vast independent revenues of the Duchy of Cornwall, an estate that generated over £24 million annually, the daughters of the monarch or the heir were left entirely dependent on the personal generosity of the reigning sovereign or marriage settlements arranged by the state. William had watched this historical dependency cause immense personal and institutional damage throughout his life. He had seen how previous royal women, including his own aunt, Princess Anne, had to fight relentlessly for decades to maintain their independent public operations, while being constrained by a centralized household budget that favored the male line of succession. He remembered the intense financial vulnerabilities his mother, Princess Diana, had faced during her separation from Charles, where every single penny for her personal security and charitable office had to be bitterly negotiated with the king's advisors. William was entirely determined to ensure that Princess Charlotte would never face that same institutional vulnerability. He knew that, as the second child of the future king, Charlotte would one day carry the title of Princess Royal. She would be expected to anchor the public profile of the monarchy, managing hundreds of charities, conducting international tours, and representing the state at major diplomatic functions. Yet, without absolute financial independence, she would be completely at the mercy of whatever faction controlled the centralized purse strings at Buckingham Palace. The dynamic became even more critical given the current, shifting layout of the modern household. With the royal family tree becoming increasingly streamlined, the administrative burden on the remaining working royals was set to triple over the next decade. Camilla's proposed amendment was not a simple public relations exercise designed to protect the family from negative tabloid headlines about royal wealth. It was a strategic, systemic attempt to establish long-term financial leverage over the younger generation. By placing Charlotte's inheritance into a holding account managed by the keeper of the privy purse, the Queen's office would effectively control the logistical fuel of Charlotte's entire future public career. William's chief of staff pulled a second ledger from a secure leather briefcase. This document contained the audited historical records of the Sovereign Estate Trust from the late 20th century. He placed the open pages under the high-intensity desk lamp, pointing directly to a precedent established in 1993. In that year, Queen Elizabeth II had signed a private declaration ensuring that any female heir in the direct line of succession would receive equal financial parity with her brothers regarding liquid capital distribution, precisely to prevent the ancient gender biases of the Crown from compromising their personal security. The Prince of Wales used this data to deliver a devastating legal counterstrike. He looked directly at the Queen's attorney and stated that the proposed amendment was not only institutional bullying, it was a direct violation of his grandmother's explicit testamentary intentions. He argued that the trust was never intended to be used as a political tool to centralize power within the current sovereign's immediate household. It was designed to protect the individuals who did the actual work of the crown from being manipulated by shifting factions within the palace inner circle. The tension in the library grew heavier as the minutes ticked by. The trustees realized that William was not just arguing about numbers or age limits. He was setting a permanent boundary regarding who truly held the ultimate authority over the long-term future of the House of Wales. He was making it clear that as the heir to the throne, he would tolerate no external interference in how he chose to prepare his children for their institutional destinies. His sister had been compromised by the old system, his mother had been broken by it, and he was drawing a hard line in the sand to protect his daughter from the exact same corporate machinery. The door at the end of the gallery finally clicked open, and the quiet sound of soft-soled shoes on the parquet floor broke the paralysis of the room. Princess Charlotte walked into the reception space, her hand held firmly by the private secretary. At 11 years old, she possessed a remarkably calm, composed demeanor that strongly mirrored her late great-grandmother's posture. She looked around the table at the sea of serious faces in dark suits, showing no sign of intimidation or confusion. She walked straight to her father's side, her eyes fixed entirely on him. William's expression softened for a fraction of a second as he pulled out the heavy leather chair next to his own, inviting his daughter to sit down at the table where her entire future independence was being actively negotiated. The standoff in front of the family lawyers. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 11. Princess Charlotte sat quietly in the oversized leather chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her gaze shifted calmly from the thick parchment documents to the faces of the senior trustees. Prince William reached across the oak surface, took the dark red leather folder containing Queen Camilla's proposed amendment, and deliberately pushed it to the far corner of the table. The movement was slow, quiet, and carried an absolute finality that left the Queen's legal representative completely speechless. William looked directly at the lead corporate attorney from Clarence House. His voice was steady, dropping into a low register that commanded total focus. He stated that the conversation regarding his daughter's financial autonomy was officially over. He informed the legal team that the original unamended terms of the Sovereign Estate Trust would be signed exactly as they were written, without a single modification from the Queen's office. He made it clear that if any representative attempted to reintroduce the red folder, he would instantly adjourn the meeting and refer the entire matter to the High Court for an independent judicial review. The mention of a judicial review caused a physical stir among the senior estate trustees. An independent court battle over a private royal trust fund would mean opening the family's highly confidential financial ledgers to public scrutiny. It would force the Crown's innermost administrative mechanisms into the open press, a scenario that the palace guard spent every waking hour trying to prevent. The Queen's attorney realized that William was not bluffing. The Prince of Wales was entirely willing to risk a massive public scandal to protect the direct line of succession from institutional encroachment. The attorney made a final, desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. He argued that the amendment had been drafted with the implicit knowledge of King Charles, who was currently conducting state duties at Balmoral Castle. He suggested that bypassing the Queen Consort's recommendation would be viewed as an act of open disrespect toward the monarch's vision for a streamlined, modern household. The attorney's tone carried a subtle threat, implying that William's defiance would trigger a severe personal confrontation with his father the moment the king returned to London. William did not back down. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his private mobile device. He placed the phone flat on the table, dialed a direct, encrypted number, and pressed the speaker button. The screen displayed the private security code for the king's personal apartments in Aberdeenshire. The phone rang twice before a familiar, tired voice answered the line. It was King Charles. The monarch sounded entirely exhausted, away from the corporate machinery of the London offices. William did not waste time with formal pleasantries. He informed his father directly that Camilla's legal team had entered apartment 1A, with an unapproved amendment designed to seize administrative control of Charlotte's inheritance. He told the king, in front of every single lawyer in the room, that he would not sign the master deed under those conditions. He stated clearly that the integrity of the House of Wales was being actively compromised by advisors operating out of Buckingham Palace. The line went completely silent for several seconds. Listeners could hear the distant sound of the Scottish wind rustling against the windows of Balmoral. When Charles finally spoke, his tone was quiet but firm. He asked his principal private secretary, who was listening on a parallel extension, if the amendment had been cleared by the formal oversight committees. The secretary stammered, admitting that the text had been fast-tracked through a private legal channel controlled exclusively by the Queen's personal staff, bypassing the standard family review protocols. The king's response was an absolute blow to the corporate lawyers sitting around the table. Charles instructed his team to withdraw the red folder immediately. He apologized to his son for the administrative misunderstanding, stating that he had never given his definitive authorization for a structural change that would compromise his granddaughter's future independence. He confirmed that the traditional layout established by Queen Elizabeth II must be fully respected to maintain the stability of the direct line. The king's direct intervention collapsed the legal ambush instantly, leaving Camilla's representative entirely isolated. William pressed the disconnect button. He looked across the table at the Queen's attorney and pointed toward the door. He did not say a word, but the gesture was unmistakable. The attorney gathered his briefcase with frantic, embarrassed movements, his face flushed red under the sharp room lighting. He bowed quickly to the prince and the young princess before exiting the room, his leather shoes squeaking loudly against the polished floorboards as he fled into the long gallery. The remaining trustees sat motionless, waiting for the Prince of Wales' next move. The atmosphere had shifted from a volatile legal battlefield into a quiet room of absolute triumph for the younger generation. William pulled the original compliance ledger back to the center of the table. He dipped his silver fountain pen into the inkwell, adjusted the paper, and prepared to finalize the document that would secure Charlotte's independent financial shield for the rest of her life. Personally, escorting the Princess Royal of the future. The heavy leather folder containing the original unamended Sovereign Estate Trust documentation lay flat on the center of the desk. Prince William adjusted his chair, turning slightly to face his daughter. At 11 years old, Princess Charlotte looked remarkably focused, her posture completely straight as her father explained the significance of the document in front of her. This was no longer just an abstract financial discussion between corporate lawyers. It was the exact moment her independent path within the royal household was being legally established. William picked up a large, leather-bound volume from the lower shelf of the desk. This was the Wales Family Registry, an ancient internal document established in the late 19th century to track the personal signatures and financial consents of the direct heirs to the throne. It was separate from the state records kept at the Public Record Office or the official books managed by the Keeper of the Privy Purse at Buckingham Palace. By bringing this private ledger into the room, William was utilizing a legal loophole that kept the signing entirely under his jurisdiction. He dipped a heavy silver fountain pen into the black inkwell and handed it to Charlotte. The pen had belonged to her great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, a detail that added an intense historical gravity to the moment. William pointed to the bottom of page 84, right beneath his own signature. He told his daughter, in a clear, encouraging voice, to sign her full name on the watermarked paper. The 3 remaining senior estate trustees watched the young princess with absolute focus. One of them, a man who had managed the royal private accounts for over 30 years, leaned forward slightly. He noticed that Charlotte did not hesitate. Her hand was completely steady as she pressed the nib to the paper, writing her full name in clear, elegant cursive. The scratch of the metal tip against the thick parchment was the only sound breaking the absolute silence of the room. This physical act of signing changed everything. Under the specific terms of the historical trust framework, a minor royal who signs the family registry in the presence of the direct heir and 2 independent trustees achieves an automatic legal elevation. The action effectively locks the assets assigned to her name into an ironclad, independent portfolio. From this moment on, no administrative committee, no private secretary, and not even the reigning sovereign could alter the distribution rules of her inheritance without her personal, written consent. The strategic layout of Camilla's legal team had been completely outpaced by William's rapid, independent maneuver. The Queen's advisors had intended to use bureaucratic delays to keep Charlotte's funds floating within the centralized palace accounts until after the summer recess. They had assumed that William would stick to the standard, slow-moving protocol, allowing their committee time to draft a secondary compromise proposal. By bringing his daughter directly into the room and executing an immediate signature, William had permanently slammed the door on any future negotiation. A minor mystery emerged right after Charlotte lifted the pen from the paper. One of the senior trustees, Lord John Henderson, who had spent his entire career operating with extreme discretion within the palace walls, did not immediately close the book. Instead, he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small, old-fashioned brass stamp bearing the private seal of the late Queen's personal estate office. He pressed the stamp firmly into the red wax right next to Charlotte's name, creating a secondary, protective legal seal that had not been officially requested by William's staff. This unexpected gesture caught the Prince of Wales entirely off guard. William looked at Henderson, his eyebrows lifting in silent question. Henderson did not offer an elaborate explanation. He simply gave the prince a subtle, respectful nod, and whispered that the late Queen would have wanted the direct line to have the ultimate protection against shifting administrative trends. The old courtier was openly shifting his institutional loyalty, signaling that the traditional legal guard secretly backed William's defensive play to protect his daughter's autonomy from external palace interference. To ensure there was no lingering gray area for future corporate overreach, William instructed his chief financial officer to immediately update the secure digital tokens linked to the trust's Swiss banking reserves. The financial architecture of the estate required that all major asset movements be validated by an immutable cryptographic key held exclusively by the Prince of Wales's office. By binding Charlotte's newly signed ledger profile directly to these digital reserves, William effectively removed the funds from the reach of the centralized treasury teams at Buckingham Palace. The lawyers representing the king's household sat in absolute silence as they watched the technical team execute the digital transition. They realized that any future attempt to access or restrict Charlotte's funding would now require a direct hack into the secure networks of the Duchy of Cornwall. It was an absolute security wall that no courtier or corporate advisor could bypass through standard legal maneuvers. William had not just won a temporary administrative argument, he had physically and digitally locked down his daughter's inheritance under conditions that would remain airtight for the next 50 years. Charlotte looked up at her father, a quiet smile appearing on her face as the ink dried on the page. William placed his hand on her shoulder, his expression filled with a deep sense of relief and paternal pride. He had managed to shield his daughter from the exact same corporate traps that had compromised previous generations of royal women. He told his private secretary to escort Charlotte back to her morning lessons, ensuring her departure was just as quiet and discreet as her arrival. As the heavy oak doors shut behind the young princess, the remaining lawyers and trustees began gathering their briefcases. The high-stakes standoff had ended in a decisive, generational victory for the House of Wales. The financial layout of the monarchy had been permanently reordered in the span of a single morning, leaving the Queen's advisors with absolutely no legal recourse. William stood by the window, watching the rain stop over the London skyline, knowing that he had successfully built a permanent, unbreakable wall around his daughter's future independent life within the crown. The new financial reality for the monarchy. The signed compliance ledger was officially locked into a fireproof titanium courier case at precisely 12:15. Prince William watched his chief security officer snap the biometric lock shut, ensuring that the physical document would be transported back to the high security vault beneath the Duchy of Cornwall administrative headquarters in London. The mechanical click of the locking mechanism resonated through the private reception room, signaling the absolute conclusion of a generational economic battle. The paperwork was no longer an internal family debate. It was now an unalterable piece of institutional history. The long-term fallout from the confrontation spread through the upper echelons of the royal household within hours. By 2 o'clock, the internal digital directory at Buckingham Palace showed that the administrative access tokens previously granted to Queen Camilla's personal financial advisors had been completely revoked from the Sovereign Estate Trust server network. The technical team at Kensington Palace had executed a total digital purge, severing the communication pipelines between the two households to prevent any secondary corporate counterstrikes. The line between the current monarch's immediate circle and the direct line of succession had never been more sharply drawn. The physical atmosphere at the palace became visibly icy during subsequent state functions. Just 48 hours after the signing ceremony, both households were required to attend a formal diplomatic reception at Windsor Castle. Observers within the household noted that William and Camilla did not exchange a single word or look throughout the 3-hour event. They stood on opposite sides of the grand reception room, separated by a sea of foreign diplomats and senior government ministers. The polite, superficial smiles usually generated for the television cameras were entirely missing, replaced by a cold, formal distance that everyone in the room could feel. The public began to notice the subtle shift in power through the official court circular logs. The weekly publications showed a massive, sudden increase in independent charitable projects registered under Princess Charlotte's personal name. These initiatives focused primarily on children's healthcare and wildlife preservation, funded entirely through the newly secured liquid reserves of her independent trust. By bypassing the centralized approval committees at Buckingham Palace, William had successfully given his daughter a distinct, uncompromised public voice years ahead of the traditional royal timeline. A final mystery within the estate's corporate structure was resolved by independent financial investigators later that month. Analysts noticed that a significant block of commercial real estate holdings in central London, previously managed under a shared family portfolio, had been quietly transferred into a private limited partnership controlled exclusively by the Prince of Wales's trustees. The timing of the transfer perfectly matched the date of the confrontation in apartment 1A. The facts proved that William had utilized a specific hidden clause within the original 19th century trust deed to execute the asset transfer. The clause allowed the direct heir to unilaterally wall off specific commercial properties if he felt the core stability of the direct succession line was facing an institutional threat. By pulling these high-yield real estate assets out of the shared pool, William had not only secured Charlotte's immediate liquid payouts, he had permanently reduced the financial leverage available to the centralized palace treasury, ensuring that the House of Wales would remain entirely self-sufficient for generations to come. Behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace, the reaction was one of stunned disbelief. Camilla's senior strategists had spent months crafting the amendment, consulting with elite corporate restructuring experts to ensure it was legally airtight. They had anticipated bureaucratic pushback, perhaps a series of heated meetings between private secretaries, or an appeal to the king's sense of balance. They had never anticipated a swift, total execution that completely bypassed their entire network of influence. The legal team realized that any attempt to challenge the signature now would require filing an open public lawsuit against a minor child of the direct line, a move that would trigger an immediate public relations catastrophe. King Charles remained completely isolated from the immediate fallout at Balmoral Castle. His decision to withdraw his support during the live speakerphone call had effectively neutralized his own staff's ability to intervene. Courtiers in London whispered that the king was secretly relieved by the outcome. While he had allowed Camilla's office to draft the modernization ledger to maintain domestic harmony, his lifelong dedication to the preservation of the direct line meant he could not support a measure that actively weakened his granddaughter's position. The king's tactical retreat had forced his wife's team to accept a total, unmitigated defeat. The corporate consultancy firm that had been quietly hired to design the centralization strategy found its contract abruptly terminated by the end of the week. The master of the household issued a crisp, formal notification stating that their services were no longer required for the upcoming fiscal review. The sudden dismissal sent a clear message to every external advisor operating within the palace walls. The internal finances of the direct line were entirely off limits, and any further attempts to treat the family's historical assets as pieces of a corporate chessboard would result in an immediate, permanent expulsion from the royal service. William's protective gamble successfully redefined the boundaries of modern royal power. It proved that the ancient traditions of the crown could no longer be used by shifting palace factions to manipulate or restrict the younger generation of working royals. He had demonstrated that a father's determination to secure his daughter's independence was far more powerful than any corporate public relations strategy designed by modern courtiers. The fragile peace inside the palace walls had been restored, but the financial architecture of the British monarchy had been permanently transformed by a single morning of unyielding defiance. The high-stakes financial battle over Princess Charlotte's inheritance highlights the intense hidden fractures operating at the very peak of the British royal family. Prince William's rapid independent maneuver proved that the younger generation of the House of Wales is entirely prepared to dismantle outdated palace structures to protect their personal autonomy and secure their institutional future.